From the KTVB News Group, this is a Decision 2018 special. The Governor of Idaho. It's the state's top position, and several are fighting to be their party's candidates. Tonight, live from Northwest Nazarene University, the Democratic contenders square off on center stage at the Brandt Center. Who will win your vote ahead of the primary election Tuesday, May 15th? From the KTVB News Group, in partnership with Northwest Nazarene University, this is the debate for Idaho Governor.
Hello and welcome to tonight's debate. I'm Dee Sarton, your moderator, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's an important night. The primary election is 2 weeks from today, and the two candidates participating tonight are eagerly awaiting your vote when that rolls around. That opportunity rolls around in a couple of weeks. So our goal tonight is to give these candidates equal time, but also to allow a free-flowing discussion. And as your moderator, I'll be working to make sure that we do that and stay focused. And I have a lot of help tonight from our panelists, my colleagues at KTVB, journalist Mark Johnson, Morgan Boydston, and Joe Paris, and Tyson Miller, who is going to work hard to help those candidates keep track of their time and make sure that we get everybody in and out on time. So let me introduce you to the candidates this evening, Representative Paulette Jordan and Mr. A.J. Balukoff. Thank you both for agreeing to participate. We'll start with opening statements. You have a minute each, and Representative Jordan, you were selected by a random draw to go first.
Well, thank you, Dee, and I want to thank our panelists for being here today, and it's good to see a good friend, Mark. Welcome back. Second debate. You're a pro at this. And welcome, everyone, all of our listeners and watchers. I really want to thank all of our folks back home, near and far. Given I'm from North Idaho, I'm certainly a far place away from home, but I was born and raised on a family farmland. For thousands of generations, my family have been here defending public lands, defending our people by and large. So the voices that I come from, who raised me in North Idaho, are the voices that I'm here to represent. And it's this heritage that I'm very much proud of, the heritage that I'm passing on to my two sons. And it's to see a better way of life, opportunity, and a way for us to seek prosperity, equality, and justice in all the ways that we need. And right now we've seen the lack of affordable health care, we've seen lack of public education, and lack of economic prosperity, which is why our leadership has failed us and the legislature has failed us. We need to fight back and ensure that every single voice in Idaho is well represented, and that is why I'm running for governor, to ensure that we're taking all of your concerns that I've listened to for the past 4 years in the State House and ensure that there's equality, that you're at the forefront. And while I'm fighting day in and day out, my ask is that you help me fight to return our state back to the people, for the people, and of the people. Thank you.
Mr. Balukoff.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank KTVB for organizing this debate and the audience for watching at home. My name is A.J. Balukoff. I'm a family man. Susie and I have raised our 8 children together. I'm also a business leader. I've been on the St. Luke's Hospital Board for 13 years. I've been a member of the Boise School Board for 21 years. One-party rule has been a bad deal for Idaho, and I know we can do better. I got into this race because of public education. Our leaders are not providing the uniform and thorough system of public schools our Constitution calls for. I also got into this to fix health care. Every Idahoan deserves health care, and when I'm governor, no one will have to choose between seeing a doctor and putting food on the table. I've spent my life bringing people together to solve the problems that we face. Now, I'm ready to do that as our governor. Thank you.
Well, thank you both again. And I wanted to bring, you mentioned the one-party rule. It really is no secret that Idaho has been known as a red state for many, many years. It's been many years since a Democrat has held the governor's office, since 1990, as a matter of fact. And I've often heard it said that it takes a unique Democrat to be able to lead in that kind of environment. And then very quickly, the name Cecil Andrus, Governor Cecil Andrus, is invoked. So my question as we start tonight is, what makes you think that you could be that kind of unique Democratic governor and actually get things done with so many Republicans in power? And Mr. Balukoff, I'll let you take that on first.
Okay, thank you. The problems that are facing our state right now is the severe underfunding of education, access to health care, and protecting our public lands. I bring a background in those issues. I've been on the Boise School Board for 21 years, and I'm proud of the fact that we have some of the best schools in the nation. All four of Boise's traditional high schools have been on the Washington Post list of top high schools in the United States. I've been on the St. Luke's Hospital Board for 13 years, expanding health care from Twin Falls to Fruitland to McCall. I understand the issues in rural Idaho as well as the urban centers on having health care come to our state. I bring that background. I've been to the legislature in my 21 years on the school board, working with legislators from both sides of the aisle. I've developed relationships of trust and respect, and I can bring that history, that experience to the governor's office, and I'm anxious to do that to solve these problems.
But Mr. Balukoff, what is it about you that would be unique? Your history, your background, those things well documented, but it takes a certain something, and I think when I mentioned Governor Cecil Andrus, everybody kind of smiled. There's that knowing smile that there was something there that made leading in a Republican-dominated environment perhaps more successful for him than others. What would that be for you?
I think it's my history of being able to work with people of varying backgrounds and being a good listener and being able to find common ground to bring people together. I think that's the kind of thing that Cecil Andrus did. He was one of our greatest governors to be able to work with the Republican legislature and accomplish many things. He was able to bring kindergarten, for example, to Idaho. And that was done with a predominantly Republican legislature. I think I have the background of working with people of diverse backgrounds so that I can bring that kind of experience to the governor's office.
All right, thank you. And your turn, Representative Jordan. Tell me what's unique about you.
You know, like Governor Cecil Andrus, he was a fabulous human being. And what made him so fabulous is that he didn't just have a great smile and a great personality with charisma. He was someone who was amongst the people. He was someone who struggled with the communities. He came from a logging background, and at that time, our loggers were struggling, and he knew what that was like. He was able to express from experience what that meant to not only him, but the community that he stemmed from. So what I value in someone like that is they keep their story very real, and it's a unique perspective because you're coming from the grassroots up. And same perspective that I bring is I was born and raised here. I was raised by my community of elders, community leaders, and a strong set of parents. And all of those voices that I represent are folks who struggled, who have struggled to make ends meet. They work hard. They're fiercely independent, yet they take care of each other. And so this is what Idaho needs more of. They need those voices represented in the State House. And so it goes above and beyond your great smile. But I love Cecil Andrus and his great legacy that he left. But a lot of that had to do with his heart. He had a good heart for the people. Same that I bring. I'm a North Idaho Democrat that has the same heart for the people. My passion is to be there for them day in and day out. In fact, oftentimes this is what I think of 24/7 is just what are the best ways we can serve the people? How can we address their ills and concerns? That is what leadership is. You care for the people very directly.
All right, I thank you both, and turn it over to Mark Johnson.
Joe's got the first question tonight, and I know we've been talking about this because this hit a hot button last night, if you got a chance to see it. And Joe, take it.
Well, more than anything we've seen on social media over the last week, Representative Jordan,
yes,
you have said that you'd be in favor of legalizing marijuana in the state of Idaho. Surrounding states, most namely Utah, a conservative state, has poured in millions of dollars in initial steps to legalize marijuana. So the question is, as governor, how aggressive would you be about legalizing marijuana in Idaho? How proactive would you be? Specifically, would you pursue special interest groups from outside the state to help bring the industry to Idaho?
Well, first we have to decriminalize marijuana, and of course I'm pro-legalization of medicinal use. And I think why we have a relationship with the national scene, working with Congress and our senators who are already pushing this conversation forward, including in the private sector, Idaho has a lot to benefit from. We see a lot of our folks crossing those borders to purchase and recreate in other states, yet they want to see this opportunity here in Idaho to not only benefit from the medicinal value, but benefit from the revenue. And I think that that tax base would really help our public education system. But more importantly, it would decriminalize marijuana to allow us to keep our prison population down and allow our state taxpayer funds to funnel back into the necessary portions that we need to address, and primarily that would be public education funding.
To be clear, you mentioned medicinal marijuana by name. How about recreational marijuana?
I see nothing wrong with recreational marijuana. I think it's up to the people to decide for themselves what they are comfortable with. Right now, medicinal use is very popular, it's very broad, and there are multiple studies and research available, including from our medical associations who have supported this newfound study that has shown that this drug or this natural plant would benefit most of our society when it comes down to cancer patients, folks with rheumatoid arthritis, including the CBD oil, which actually would help advance and support our young people, our children who are suffering from epilepsy and seizures.
If I could jump in with a quick follow-up to that. What about now that Colorado has had it legalized since 2012, there are some studies there showing some unintended consequences. Have you looked at those unintended consequences, and are you concerned about that?
Well, there always are going to be unintended consequences, and I think that's why we have an opportunity now to learn from all of those states and everything that they've done so far. So we want to make sure that we're learning from the pros and learning from the cons, and that's how we'll move forward as governor.
But those cons include, in Colorado, a 145% increase in the number of fatal accidents, underage use on the rise, teenagers, more and more teenagers using it, pediatric exposure, agricultural implications, costs associated with legalizing marijuana. But you feel like that is not a factor in terms of trying to push and get it legalized in Idaho?
Listen, I'm always about listening to the people first. So when the people want this, I am all for it. In fact, because it's Mother Earth's natural medicine, why would we prevent this from being an opportunity for the people? It has done a lot of good, especially for those who are struggling with the synthetic drugs that are far more dangerous, especially when you look at our opioid crisis and meth and heroin that has plagued our society that I come from. On top of that, we are seeing more and more FDA-approved drugs, synthetic drugs, like synthetic marijuana as one example, that are already seeing fatalities. We're hurting our society by preventing them from having access to a natural medicinal drug.
Representative Jordan, is this something that you would want to leave to the voters or the state legislature to take care of, most likely a voter initiative, or would you be proactive in pursuing it from your pulpit?
I appreciate the question, because what I would like to do is listen to our people first. And I know that there are areas or studies or even polls to show that there are favorability towards medicinal and recreational marijuana. But what I want to do is work with our legislative body first. That's what a governor does. We work as a team and make sure that we're all comfortable with this topic. And of course, the conversation right now is very new for Idaho. I've pushed decriminalization 2 sessions ago, and I've seen some pushback because there are some folks who are much more conservative than others and are not up to date on the new studies and the impacts. So we have to catch everyone up to speed first, and then we can start moving forward together in a responsible manner in the best way possible.
Mr. Balukoff, address the issue of marijuana legalization in Idaho. I mean, you've been vocal about not being a huge fan of it, but is the door open at all for you?
Well, of course it is. I am not in favor of putting people in jail for using marijuana. And as far as other drugs are concerned, we spend too much time treating addictions like a crime, and when they should be treated like a disease and help people get off of addictions. With marijuana, I believe more research needs to be done to identify the unintended consequences that may be there. We need to understand it better, and I don't see our legislature giving a bill anytime soon that would legalize marijuana. So the most, probably the quickest way, if the people of Idaho want to legalize marijuana, would be to go through the referendum procedure, the initiative, like they've done with expanding Medicaid.
Follow-up, if I could. What about then along those lines, as Representative Jordan mentioned, what about CBD oil and medicinal marijuana?
There again, there's anecdotal information that indicates that CBD oil is beneficial, and I can understand why families would want to reach for whatever they can to help a child that's having seizures. One of my children had seizures when he was a little boy, and it lasted for 1.5 years, and it's very worrisome for parents to do that. but I think it's important. And as I was talking to our children's pediatrician, he mentioned that research needs to be done to understand how to use CBD oil, what the drug interactions may be, what the dosages are, and I think that's pretty common as I've talked with doctors that they would like to know more, they'd like to have the research done so we know exactly what we're dealing with.
Do you want to move on to education?
Let's do.
Okay, let's do it.
This is obviously a pillar of both of your platforms and has been since you declared your candidacy. Education. You've talked a lot about it and the need for reform. Representative Jordan, I'd like to talk to you. This is something that you've addressed on the campaign trail.
Yes.
And there's a big crowd watching tonight that would like for you to tell them, as a single mom,
Yes.
you attended Gonzaga Preparatory School, and now you are sending at least one of your two sons.
Two of my sons.
You're sending both of your sons to
Yes.
Gonzaga Preparatory School in Spokane, outside of the state.
Well, they go to All Saints Catholic School, and then my older son will be going on to Gonzaga Prep.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Well, the question is, how can you elevate education in rural communities like the one that you grew up in to the level that you meets your expectations for your students so that you would have an opportunity to keep your kids in state? How will you do that?
That's a perfect question, Mark, because I grew up in rural Idaho where all of our schools are struggling. And because we are relying on supplemental levies to make ends meet, that's a problem. And as a mother, I have experienced that on the front line, fighting for my school district to continue to have its school. What was unfortunate is when we continue to siphon away money from our public schools, everyone hurts. The families, the children, the teachers, and the entire structure. So as a governor, what I would love to do is ensure that we are properly funding our schools, number one. My kids go to these other schools primarily because they were given a letter that said, we are inadequate. We suggest you teach your kids elsewhere. Bring your kids outside the district, essentially. And that's unfortunate because I'm sure a lot of parents and a lot of schools have received that letter because we had not had the support. So it does come down to funding. However, we have to be more resourceful. So in this state, I want to ensure that that's why we start incorporating more support services with our tax base, working together as a community, 0 through 5 pre-K, and then building up this developmental pipeline for education. There's a lot more to it than I'm getting with my 60 seconds, but
right.
I certainly want to elaborate with you more.
Well, I would like some specifics because I do hear you say that you are in favor of putting more money into the education bucket. Yeah. Specifically, does that include your hopes of legalizing marijuana and the taxes from that?
No, it comes by ensuring that we're saving our resources, that we're not expending all of our taxpayer dollars into unnecessary causes, such as, overflowing our prison system and then paying for prison contracts outside of our state, amongst many other contracts that we're already employing and are not necessary. But to get down to it, while we're expanding economy, like I told you before in the last debate, which was basically to start building around our tourism industry, a $3.4 billion tourism industry, which would really help expand our small towns, rural towns here in Idaho. We're able to now expand into energy. We have so many resources, including the Idaho National Laboratory, which has shown that all of the great research that is cutting-edge technology that's based out of that research lab would benefit all of Idaho. In fact, we could even serve as the energy sector to serve all of the utilities for the Western region. We have that capacity and the ability. Clean energy, this is why the two with environment and public lands go together. We have an opportunity to source clean energy in this state for the rest of the region. And then, of course, I'm looking at ag because we need to start providing more ag resources, ag opportunities. And all of that, the money, by expanding our economy and saving what we're already expending as is, that money needs to go back to education. We promised our families, we've promised them that we would do more, we would do better, and yet here we are, decades later, doing nothing but making empty promises.
Mr. Balukoff, same question. Education. You've said that it needs to be pumped up. How do you do it?
Well, let me start by saying, can you imagine, as a parent, receiving the letter that Representative Jordan just described from the superintendent saying, we can't educate your children properly? If you're one of the parents that can't afford to send your child to a private school, you're kind of stuck, which puts the onus back on our state and our legislature to provide adequate funding for all schools so that it shouldn't matter where a child lives for getting the quality of education that should be uniform and equal throughout our state. Now, our Republican legislature blew it this year. They had an opportunity to put up to $250 million more into public education, and they did a tax cut that benefits mainly the wealthy instead. During the recession, they promised when they made tax cuts that when the economy got better, they would be putting more money back into, they would restore the tax cuts and put that back into public education. They had an opportunity to do that this year, and they didn't do it. When I'm governor, when there's excess funds that come in over and above what was budgeted, we're going to put that money to education and make sure that all kids in Idaho have a good education.
So are you saying that you would try to repeal the tax cuts?
That horse is out of the barn. I don't think we can repeal it, but tax revenues are coming in higher than budget this year. So I anticipate another surplus over budgeted revenue this next year. And as governor, I would advocate very strongly to use that money to restore funding to public schools.
We need to move on, but just very, very quickly, if I can.
I would like to add, too, by that, Mark, because I think that the other issue that we leave out here in this conversation is all of the corporate tax loopholes that we are given, and because they add up quite extensively in terms of exemptions and incentives, that is the loophole we need to close. We need to ensure that we are making it fair for our system and our economy and help our Idaho working families.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being least important, 10 being the most important, where does education, pumping up our education system, what number do you give it if you were governor? Mr. Balukoff?
1 being the most important?
No, 1 being the least important.
Oh, 10.
11.
Thank you.
So you both have come out in favor of Common Core, but where you seem to diverge is on charter schools. Explain your stance on supporting charter schools. We're going to start with you, Mr. Balukoff.
Thank you. As you may know, the Boise School District chartered the first charter school in the state over 20 years ago, and I was part of that school board that did that. I'm supportive of parents having choice. If they feel that that's the best alternative for their child, they should have the ability to put them into a charter school. However, my experience is that most charter schools do not perform up to expectations. They have basically kids who have engaged parents, who they have very little children from poverty. They have very few English language learners. They have very few special education kids. So you would think they would outperform our traditional public schools. And my experience is comparing charter school performance to schools with similar demographics. The traditional charter schools, the traditional public schools outperform the charters almost every time. I think it's a problem that we are competing over limited resources, and we need to address that too.
A follow-up to that, you've got school districts like Nampa who are losing students to charter schools. Their growth is inevitable. How enthusiastically, if you became governor, would you support the growth of charter schools?
I would support that if that's what the local communities want, and this is really getting right down to local control. It's generally people at the local level who decide they need a charter school for whatever reason, and then they apply to the Charter School Commission. I think we'd keep that same process in place so that local citizens and parents could apply for a charter school if that's what they felt was appropriate in their community.
Thank you. And same question to you. What is your stance on charter schools in Idaho?
Well, when Mr. Balukoff had mentioned before an attack of those charter schools, I felt defensive as a mother because I actually know many of the teachers and students in the charter schools in my district. My sons have not gone from charter to private. They've been in the public school system. And while I meet these schools back home, Palouse Charter, Moscow Charter, there are fantastic teachers. And the students that they serve are very diverse. There are students with hearing and visual impairments, and they're able to be as innovative as possible. And I've seen the success of these students and how they're impacting their lives in the best way. So I support them and what they're doing and all of their good efforts. I'm really proud of those schools. But I also know that they are also public schools. So we have to be mindful that we know education, when it comes down to which is public, which is private, charter schools are public schools. But the difference is how we fund them, and then, of course, how they're being determined as far as what are the scales, what are the requirements, and what are, and I know that they're actually going to be more lenient. They're pushing for more diversity, and I hear from many of the boards that they're pushing to ensure that they are serving the greater needs of the students, such as those with disabilities. So I'm happy about that, but at the same time, public schools, if they're failing, we need to ensure that we prioritize funding to those schools, and then look at the levels of innovation that the charters are doing, and then optimize that innovation, which is what I'm about, and applying that to all of our public schools.
And you would support more taxpayer money going into charter schools?
Well, if that's the funding scale, I have to look at the funding scale and ensure that we're balancing out what that looks like, because I know they can also go after other funding. So ultimately, all the funding needs to go into the public schools first.
Let's talk a little bit about higher education as well. And Representative Jordan, you're emphasizing making college more affordable for Idahoans. Mr. Balukoff, I'm sure you share that goal as well. And with another tuition increase just approved by the State Board of Education, ranging from 3.5% to 8% next year, I'm sure that would be welcome news to many parents if we could see those tuition increases stop or tuition become more affordable for more students. So let me start with you, Mr. Balukoff. What could you do as governor to help college-bound students in Idaho afford that education?
Well, there's several things that we can do. First, we need to make sure that the state is making the commitment to our colleges and universities that they deserve, so that they are not forced into raising tuition. The other thing that we've done in the Boise School District is put a high emphasis on advanced placement courses where students can earn college credit while in high school. We have had people graduate from our high schools and start college as sophomores, saving a whole year of tuition in a college or university. I think we need to also increase scholarship opportunities for students so that they can attend. One of the biggest obstacles is being able to afford to go to college. They look at that cost, they look at the amount of student loan debt that they would have to incur, and many students would rather go to work than incur all of that debt, and they somehow don't see how they can pay the tuition that's there. So helping them through scholarship opportunities, increasing the commitment to advanced opportunities, all those would help students it would help make colleges and universities more accessible to students. And then the other thing we need to pay attention to is not every student wants or needs to go to college. We have career technical education programs that are a lot less expensive and will train students for good paying jobs. And we need to emphasize that and make sure students understand all of their possibilities when they graduate from high school.
Representative Jordan, I just will let you know you're a little over on your time, so maybe if you can make this answer fairly succinct, but I believe it was on the front page of your website that this is one of your big issues. So tell us how you would manage to get tuition more manageable.
In 10 seconds. Okay. First of all, we really do need to prioritize funding to public education. This would help us when it comes to career and tech advancements. If we can even put more money into advanced placement programs and dual credit courses, which our children need, which would internally help offset higher education costs and get them on that pipeline moving forward. And why that needs to happen is because our working families, they need their support in that public education structure, and that would really internally offset those costs in the long term.
All right, thank you. That was good timing there. We appreciate that. Morgan, I believe you're next.
This question is specifically for you. You are campaigning on a platform of closing the wage gap. You want to increase pay for women in Idaho. How exactly are you planning to do that? On your website, you say we need to crack down on employers who knowingly pay women less. You want to bring that fight to the Capitol by working to pass legislation. Walk me through specifically what your plans are for both women and minorities.
Well, it starts with educating people to make sure they are aware of that wage gap. There's some people that are in denial. In fact, my wife took a phone call just the other day from a gentleman who claimed that there was no wage gap, that in fact women make more than men. And we know that's not true. There's a case in the newspaper right now that talks about an actress who was paid less than her supporting male counterpart. And of course, once that came to light, the company is now going to make back pay to that person. So first is to educate people that there is an issue and there is a problem. And then we work through the Department of Labor and the other resources we have to make sure that there's equal pay for equal work throughout our state.
What would that legislation look like specifically, though?
I don't know that it needs to be legislation so much as education and working directly with employers where we see a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Jordan, would you like to jump in on that?
Sure. I think we have a candidate here who's very out of touch, because I think we're all well aware, as a woman myself, I know that even a woman of color is paid far less than the average woman who is paid way less. So if you're getting $0.75 of the dollar and the woman of color in the state is getting even half of that dollar, that's a major problem. How do we fix that? We start unifying the collective voices, and we push legislation that would mandate responsibility of our business owners and ensure that we're also keeping up with the current conversation of a livable wage. What does that look like? We need to index and, of course, pay attention to the current economy, but honestly, listening to the voices that are already there. Let's not forget the women. Let's not forget our people of color, and ensure that there's fairness all across the board. But legislation can be pushed to address this issue.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? You want to raise the minimum wage.
Yes, absolutely.
How would you do that? I know we have a lot of minimum wage workers in Idaho, but it's the average wage that people are struggling with. So how would how would minimum wage increases really impact the livable wage?
Yes, and I appreciate that, because I co-sponsored legislation a few years ago to index the minimum wage based off of the Consumer Price Index. And we started at $9 an hour, hoping to increase and pushing this in our legislative body. And I think really the challenge is working with the business community and providing that their voice is at the forefront at this table, so that we're not leaving out our small business community. So this relationship must happen, but you need leadership at the top. So when I'm governor, that is the exact promotion that I will push as an ambassador of the people, to ensure that all of the voices are at the table, because we cannot come to this conversation or an agreement if we're trying to just mandate legislation and hitting our businesses hard, especially the small businesses. So I think the best responsible solution is to index the wage, and of course being fair to our women and ensuring that their needs are being met, because we have people who are working more hours than they're being paid for or accounted for, and we need to stop that where it happens now.
And Mr. Balukoff, she called you out of touch. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, as a businessman who employs more than 400 people in downtown Boise, I'm not out of touch. I know what's going on, and I know what the wages are, and I know in my businesses we do pay equal pay for equal work.
I'm going to expose my ignorance here, but explain to me very quickly and see if you both agree on indexing the wage briefly. What does that mean, and how does that apply, and would you agree with that? So Representative Jordan first.
Well, I've already said I agree to it, because I've already pushed it by via legislation.
So just explain to me what that means in practical terms.
So practical terms, we're going to start with a specific wage, and we'll work with the cost of living, which is, with inflation included, and all of our current data that would help average out what that would look like for our current economy. And then, of course, we could start at $9 an hour, $10 an hour, and then move from there, so that we're working with that cost of inflation and the cost of living.
Thank you. And Mr. Balukoff, do you think that's a good strategy?
Yes, I have long advocated for indexing the minimum wage to the Consumer Price Index, so that the minimum wage retains its purchasing power over time. The problem we've got with the current minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is that was set years ago, and it doesn't have the same purchasing power that it did when it was set.
Thank you. Mark?
Representative Jordan, I've heard you mention this before. You've talked about how concerned you are with connectivity between rural and urban Idaho. As you know, urban areas are growing at record numbers in our state, rural areas aren't. Our infrastructure is crumbling, it's dated, and it doesn't seem like there's enough money in the coffer to fix that. How would you address the connectivity issue as it pertains to infrastructure and managing the urban with the rural areas, and both are part of this body of the gem state that we all know and love?
That's a great question, Mark. And the reason why I bring that up in my platform is because I know from rural areas of Idaho that the greater need is rural transportation. We need to expand those opportunities for people to utilize rural transportation to connect rural towns to urban cities. By means of doing that, we are building up our main streets. We're connecting people with our veterans, people with disabilities, our elderly, our folks who need those services, who don't have those currently as a means to get by and to go to recreate, to get to their health care, their medical appointment, to get to the local school or to get to their job, even just to get by with going to the local grocery store. So we do need to connect our rural with our urban, but by means of rural transportation, and then we build up our main streets in the same regard. You say everybody's going to the urban because they're seeing more economic opportunity. Well, we have to bring that same economic opportunity to the rural main streets, which is why we have to address those blighted storefronts and help enhance the support services for small businesses. We do that by plugging in. We have all of these research institutions around the state. We have the INL, we have tourism, we have a huge ag industry, we have timber. You know, we have so many opportunities where we can really expand not only in energy, tourism, and ag, but you have to look at how we connect those with local institutions and our public schools.
So the same formula that you're suggesting to fund education will also go into funding infrastructure and rural downtown.
Well, yes, a lot of that will help pay for itself. I mean, we're looking at opportunities for local option tax here, so communities can even decide what are their best needs. Local option tax would really help our roads commissions. It would really help if we wanted to build more local developments that would support or serve the needs of the local people. And I think that working together locally and statewide would be the best solution for all of us moving forward.
Mr. Balukoff, same question.
In the 21st century, in the world we live in today, reliable broadband to all parts of our state is an imperative. It's necessary for businesses to thrive. It's necessary for the delivery of education. It's necessary for the delivery of health care through telehealth. Many rural areas do not have specialists, and they need a consultation. And if they have reliable broadband, the family practice doctor in McCall can consult with a specialist in Boise and get the consultation they need without having to transport the patient all the way into Boise. So our state needs to make a commitment to making sure we have reliable broadband to all parts of our state. And of course, keeping our roads and bridges in good repair and safe is also a moral imperative. Over half of our bridges are past their useful life. And if you've driven on the state highways, you're familiar with potholes. That needs to be fixed.
Well, along those same lines, I'll ask you the follow-up. How would you do it? It just takes money.
It just takes money, and our gas tax has not kept up with the purchasing power, the inflation that has gone on. And so we need to evaluate, is a gas tax still the most fair and efficient way to collect the highway funds we need in this day and age when we have more and more electric vehicles running on alternative fuels or electricity. Perhaps they're not paying their fair share. We need to have the discussion as a state as to how do we collect the amount of money we need to keep our roads and bridges in good, safe repair.
So you would recommend an increase in the gas tax. It was raised in 2015, 7 cents a gallon. You would suggest, am I hearing you correctly, that you would like
That's
to...
not what I suggested.
Okay.
I'm suggesting that the gas tax may be dated technology, and we need to take a look at a more modern way of collecting the funds we need. Perhaps it's a mileage tax, perhaps it's related to weight or vehicle fees or something. We need to bring the people together who will be paying for those funds to maintain our roads and bridges, and let's talk about what's the most fair and equitable way to raise the amount of revenue that we need to keep our roads and bridges in good condition.
All right. I have a follow-up question, somewhat related, somewhat not. Mr. Balukoff, I'm going to start with you, and I'll ask the counterpart to Ms. Jordan. But you have served on the Boise School District Board for so many years. You're on St. Luke's board. You are a Boise businessman. Mm-hmm. What makes you relatable to the rural viewers and voters across Idaho?
Well, first of all, when I'm on the St. Luke's Hospital Board, even though that's headquartered in Boise, we have hospitals and clinics all over the area, from Twin Falls to Jerome to Mountain Home to McCall to the Wood River Valley to Fruitland, and so we are familiar. I am familiar with the issues that are in these rural areas and the critical access hospitals and the challenges that they have. I have been, interacting with my counterparts on the school boards, the trustees from around the state. We get together in the Idaho School Boards Association, and I talk with trustees from the rural areas of our state, and I know the challenges they're faced with, and we discuss those. I think I can relate to people in rural areas.
The challenges are unique, though. So in school districts, unlike the Boise School District, there's a crisis of a teacher shortage. You've got the rural doctor shortage, which, as you are aware of, being on St. Luke's board. And I think it might be difficult for people watching right now to try to really understand how you could understand those unique and challenging issues.
As I've traveled around the state, I make it a point to visit with school superintendents and principals and hospital administrators, and I talk to them and ask about their challenges. I know that in some districts, half of their teachers are not certified. They have a difficult time attracting and retaining teachers. And a lot of them had told me, we feel like a farm club for one of the urban school districts. We hired brand new teachers out of school, have graduated, and after 2 or 3 years after we've trained them, they go to work for Boise or Nampa or one of the larger school districts, and we lose them. I understand that issue, and that's why we need to make a commitment to help these rural areas, particularly in the school districts, to not only attract new teachers, but to help them to retain those teachers as they get experience.
Thank you. And you touched on the rural drain in terms of doctors, in terms of teachers, even in jobs, oftentimes.
Yes.
So that's something you are aware of and you connect with. But on the converse, how can you relate to the growing pains that people here in the Treasure Valley and other urban metro areas are experiencing?
I already am. I mean, I live here part of the year now. I mean, I've served in the legislature, so for those 4 years, I've experienced what Boise residents experience. I live in the North End in my apartment there on 8th Street. Everyone's welcome to stop by and say hello. But because of the fact that I lived here and I know the experience of what it's like to be in the urban center base, I've watched people being pushed out because of development. I've watched people struggle with certain access to needs that they have concerns with. And by and large, because I was not raised here, I was raised in North Idaho, I was raised in Southern Idaho in the Pocatello area. I definitely have a strong connection to the rural parts of Idaho. But I see some of the concerns here, and I don't think that there's much of a disconnect because of the fact that most of these folks are even my age who are having trouble with just renting a home. Less and less of my generation are buying homes. So I know that affordable housing is a major issue. I know that development is a major issue. Being pushed out and then being redistricted, and just a lot of the concerns that I hear are certainly brought to my doorstep, so I'm well aware of the concerns. But how that's being addressed, that is up to the Boise City Council, and I would implore that they listen to the voices of the people, because that's where I see the disconnect. The people don't feel like they're being listened to. They're fighting and they're struggling, and they must be heard. And if they're not, there are going to be major problems. And I will tell you that every election cycle will be very heated, but we need to get those progressive voices who will listen to everyone. And right now I don't see that, and because I hear the struggles, and I know that with the development and the small farmers who are wanting to keep the land the way it is so that they can continue to farm, those voices need to be heard. So I think there's a lot of imbalance politically, and I think that that's why our people here also are fighting to push their concerns at the forefront, and it really does come down to local politics. But I certainly am part of that conversation and that voice, so I will fight for them as well.
Joe?
The conversation about acquiring federal land for management has been had over the years in Idaho, and our neighboring states, Utah and Nevada, have done so with some success. The idea, though, of doing it scares some people. There is liability there, but there's also converse. You can help prevent wildfires in your own backyard. Mr. Balukoff first. What is your view on acquiring federal land for management?
I certainly think that the state should work beside the federal land managers. They should not be on our back telling us what to do, but they should be at our side as a partner to manage those federal lands and take our state input. But for transferring, I am opposed to transferring ownership to the state because we, as a state, cannot afford to own the public lands. The first huge forest fire would devastate our state budget. We don't have the money to do that. So we are much better off owning them in partnership with the rest of the citizens of the United States and have them help us pay for the management costs, the fire suppression costs. But we, since they are within our state boundaries, we should have a strong voice in how those lands are managed and do so as a partner with the federal land managers.
Representative Jordan, same question.
Thank you. So I come from an area where we have a good prominent base of loggers and we have a good representation of foresters. So being in rural Idaho, that is one of the major concerns, is how we're properly managing our forests. And while fire suppression is a major cost for our state, we still have to be extremely responsible in how we're managing internally. And for us, I come from this region where, our foresters go in, they will thin each timber site, and then they'll send those contracts out to loggers. So there's an even keel responsibility. Everyone shares this perspective. How we're managing now is not adequate. We need to have more support to our forestry department to ensure that this relationship, which is a prominent one, which is the Good Neighbor Authority Agreement, is expanded so that we continue to keep our public lands public and the federal lands still federal so that everyone can benefit for the future generations. I mean, heck, my relatives for thousands of years have fought for this land and protected it so that everyone can enjoy its beauty. We need to ensure that we are going to stand firm on our agreements and protect public lands for everyone's use, whether you're an outdoor sportsman, hunting and fishing, or you're the family next door who wants to go out and enjoy your family and your life and ensure that you are able to express yourself and of course, clean air and clean water. We need to have all of these points secured for the future. However, the responsibility is that Good Neighbor Authority Agreement and then managing those public lands for the betterment of everyone.
Let's move along to Mark.
Gun laws have never been talked about in our generation as much as they are right now, with the school shootings and the safety concerns that many parents have. You both have said that you are gun owners, and you both support the gun laws. But the question that many of our viewers have right now, and we're watching that online, many of them are asking you about your Second Amendment beliefs and responsible gun ownership as it pertains to school safety as well as at home. Where do you stand there? I'll start with you, Mr. Balukoff.
Thank you. I am a supporter of the Second Amendment. I do own guns, and I believe that most gun owners in Idaho are responsible, safe owners of guns and operators of their guns. There are a few that should not have guns. Convicted felons, domestic abusers, and people that have mental health issues that would cause them to be a danger to themselves or other people. I would support good universal background checks to close the gun show loophole, to keep the hands out of those few that shouldn't have access to guns, and make sure that we close that. As far as keeping our schools safe, I'm opposed to arming teachers. In the Boise School District, we believe that the best way to keep our schools safe is to have good coordination and communication with local law enforcement and other first responders. We need good physical security measures. A good example of that was when I visited the Ryrie School District. We had to buzz the doorbell at the front door because the doors were locked and we couldn't get in. The employee at the front desk was able to buzz and let us in so we could check in at the front desk. That way they can control access to the schools. It's also very important that the schools foster a culture of respect and communication, and that the students and teachers have the skills and abilities to recognize bullying and how to intervene to stop it. And that kind of culture change in our schools will make our schools much safer than, say, arming teachers.
Representative Jordan.
Well, I'll be much more succinct. So as a gun owner, I always put that out as full disclosure. I come from a very rural town, as you know, and so we are very much reliant on subsistence hunting and fishing. One of the major concerns that I have as a mother is that we have not really pulled down on legislation in terms of requiring that we are doing our universal background checks, keeping our gun shows out of our schools. These are things, concerns that I have as a parent. So I want to make sure that we are being more accountable. And while we are a gun state, what I push with everyone is let's be the most responsible gun state in the nation. So let's be more responsible, more accountable. I've spoken with kids in schools, and when I ask them to raise their hands as far as who owns a gun, a good vast majority of them raise their hands. So a lot of it comes down to being accountable and talking to our youth and raising these conversations. Yes, sir.
You spoke at the state capitol in March when there was a large gathering of students, and a common idea they shared was banning a very certain kind of weapon, the AR-15. Do you think the AR-15 has a space in Idaho?
It doesn't have a place here in Idaho. But I'm not for taking people's guns away who have been responsible gun owners. I think this is a conversation that we must have moving forward, though, with our children who are needing to be at the forefront of this conversation. We should be looking at what they want. They're the future leaders. They're the ones who are going to inherit all of Idaho. So let's listen to them, because we need to ensure that they are safe and that they feel protected and secure.
I'd like to ask you both quickly, a lot has been made of the very negative ads and the really combative nature of the Republican primary campaigns for governor. And so I'm curious, if you are elected as your party's nominee to move on and face one of the gentlemen running on the Republican ticket, are you in favor of seeing that type of campaigning continue, or will you take a pledge that you would not engage in negative campaigning, attack ads, and encourage PACs that are supporting you to do the same? And I'll start with you, Representative Jordan.
Yes, thank you, Dee. And that's actually a very critical question, because I've ran multiple elections against Republicans who have gone to the negative. And the way I was raised with my relatives was just to always take the high road. You always speak positive, even of those who will speak ill of you. So I've often spoken even to my own opponents and encouraged them, give them a hug and tell them how much I love them and care about them, because they too are passionate about an issue. But even though we may not agree, whether it's 9 out of 10 times, we still have to realize that we're part of the same community and that we should be working together. So I've operated with this same capacity with every single election cycle that I've gone through, and going up against Republicans. And while they will go low and certainly try to tarnish my good reputation or my hard work, I know that in the end the truth always surfaces and your reputation speaks for itself. And that's why I feel that when you're going to run for governor, you are running to represent the people and your heritage. So you should remember that you are there because of your elders. And so I want to make sure that they're proud of what I do and all the actions that I take. So I promote being respectful and being responsible for that regard.
So you wouldn't allow your campaign to go negative?
No, I don't prefer going negative at all. And I think we've been very good at that, keeping very positive in this campaign, and I'm proud of my team for doing so.
Mr. Balukoff?
I am proud of the ads my campaign is running. At the outset, when I hired the media firm, I made it clear that I did not want to run negative ads, and we haven't. I'm proud of the fact that my ads are issue-oriented, positive, and build hope for the future of our state. When I ran in 2014, and I did run against a Republican, and some of his supporters did run negative ads against me, and I did not respond in kind, because I don't believe that's the way we should be running campaigns, is making up stories or exaggerating the faults of our opponent. But we should stick to the issues, talk about what we want to accomplish and what our priorities will be. And those kinds of ads are devastating. I get lots of feedback on my ads and on the Republican ads, and people thank me for not going negative and ask me, please don't go negative, and I assure them I will not go negative.
Well, we have time for one final question, if you'll watch Tyson closely so that he can give you good time cues. Mark?
Yeah, this is going to have to be quick. And again, this comes from our viewers, and they want to know about immigration. As you know, there are many undocumented workers that are all over the state of Idaho. Many of them have produced what we call dreamers. You know what's going on federally in Washington, D.C., all of the debate over sanctuary cities. Where do you stand on immigration? And if you get the job as governor, who will you work with as your confidant and your counsel along these lines? Let's start with you, Mr. Balukoff.
Thank you. One of the staff members on my campaign is a dreamer. He was brought to this country when he was 5 years old. He grew up in Haley and considers that his hometown. He considers himself a citizen of the United States of America. He is in every way, except for the paperwork, a citizen. 85 to 90% of agricultural workers in our state are foreign-born. We need meaningful immigration reform, but it's got to come from the federal level. As governor, I would be a voice of welcome and encouragement, especially to our congressional delegation to let's get some meaningful immigration reform done so that we have a viable guest worker program and a path to citizenship for those workers who add to our economy and our culture.
And Representative Jordan.
Thank you. In fact, I'm already working with our immigrant population and our leaders amongst the base, and of course they're working with the ACLU. So this conversation is already brewing, and one of the areas of interest that I have is to continue building upon the pathway to citizenship, working with our national legislators. But locally, our people need action now. These people are working for our agricultural industry. They're working with local businesses. They need access to legalized certification for driver's licenses. And like California, we can utilize that model to apply to Idaho so that they are not only legal to drive, but they are insured and safe on the road.
All right, thank you both. That concludes our time for questions, but you both have roughly a minute for your closing statements. And Mr. Balukoff, again, randomly selected to go first with your closing statement.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you to KTVB for hosting this debate, and thank you to the television audience watching at home. This race comes down to not only experience, but vision and the ability to make that vision a reality. We have a long history of one-party rule that has not been good for this state, and we can do much better than that. I believe that health care is a right of every Idahoan should have access to health care and be able to receive the medical attention they need. When I'm governor, no one will have to choose between health care and food on the table. Idaho has become a scroll-down state, which means if you want to see where we rank in comparison to the other states, you scroll to the bottom of the list to find us. We're tired of it. Idaho is ready for a change, and I'm ready to deliver as your governor. So I ask for your vote on May 15th. Thank you.
And Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Dee. So first and foremost, because I was born and raised here in Idaho, my priority is every single citizen of Idaho. Whether you're rich or poor, black or white, young or old, your voice is the voice that I take with utmost respect. It is imperative that you are heard and that your voice is carried into the State House. When I'm governor, you have a seat at the table. And that is why when I fight day in and day out for my kids, I'm fighting for every single child of Idaho. Our state is requiring new leadership that is not only fresh, but bold, and taking progressive action to ensure that everything that we are needing, all of our needs to affordable access to health care, public education, public lands, protecting our environment, economic opportunity, all of these are available to every single one of us and not just the privileged few, and that we're getting away from the cronyism and the corruption with our corporations. So we want to make sure that we're creating balance, fairness, and that is exactly what I represent, and that is exactly what I strive for and will continue to fight for day in and day out. And it is why I'm asking for your support and your vote come May 15th. Thank you.
2 weeks from tonight, we'll all be together watching your vote count. So we've got a busy couple of weeks. You certainly do, and we have a busy couple of weeks ahead as well. We want you to know that these debates are going to be posted at ktvb.com. I'm going to be real curious to see what voter turnout is like for this May 15th primary. Hopefully, a lot of you are going to be encouraging your friends and family to vote.